Okay, so our first speaker tonight. Oops. Dr. Michelle Bean is co-owner of Optimal Health and Fitness, a holistic health center that integrates acupuncture, chiropractic, nutritional ketosis, fitness, and other modalities. She also co-leads an outdoor fitness boot camp, has a black belt in mixed martial arts, and loves to educate individuals on many aspects of health. Tonight, she'll be talking to us about endocannabinoids and their receptors that are found throughout the entire body, in the brain, organs, connective tissues, glands, and immune cells, where they regulate a constant homeostasis. So please welcome Michelle Bean.
And we're on. Wow, this is incredible. I love to see everyone out here today. It's really interesting that on the timing, everyone's like, this is great timing, this is really good timing, to be up here speaking about cannabis. And today's 4/19, but tomorrow's 4/20. Does anyone catch that? So if only it was a day later. I'm from Santa Cruz. I live in Santa Cruz right now, and it's practically a national holiday in Santa Cruz every year. So, yes. So just so I know who I'm talking to, I'm just going to ask a couple questions. And first of all, everyone's familiar with the term cannabis? Is everyone familiar with the term cannabis? Most people. Okay, and when I talk about, and I'm going to go through all of this terminology. Now I'm going to go through it slow, and cannabidiol. So this has been a huge interest of mine for maybe about, I'm a newbie, so I'm going to say about 4 years, maybe 5 years. And when I grew up, marijuana was the term that I used, and marijuana was illegal for me, and it was the evil thing to do, like say no to drugs. And I've grown up with that understanding. I'm only a little grown up, actually. But up until this time, I've grown up with this understanding that, that pot is bad and marijuana is bad, and it's never been something that's been in my consciousness. So about 4 years ago, I'm a chiropractor, and about 4 years ago, my mom went into surgery for her back. Actually, back up 20 years ago, she went in for a back surgery, and it was failed. It was a failed back surgery. So she spent about 17, 18 years of the rest of that part in misery and pain. And back, 20 years ago, when they did surgery, they would take a piece of the bone from the hip, they would scrape that bone, and then they would put it as part of the fusion. They'd use it. So for 15 years, my mom's been suffering, not so much even from the back pain, the original source, but from where they took the bone. But that being said, she's been on this constant, ongoing, she went down the funnel, right? In the traditional American model of treating chronic pain. So, and it got so bad, and I believe it's because of that fusion that the rest of her spine just continued to deteriorate. So 4 years ago, she was going in for a full spinal surgery, and they wouldn't even touch her spine because her neck was so bad. So she first had to go in and get her neck fused, and they fused her from about C3 to C7, so pretty much her entire neck is fused. And then a year later, they fused the rest of her spine. So she has 2 freely movable joints in her spine right now. And being a chiropractor and really understanding the nervous system and the correlation between movement and spinal movement and gravity and how our brain processes information and life, really this was detrimental to me. But even more than that, when, just right before the surgery, the neurosurgeon takes us into the office and says, you know what, we have a really big concern here, and that's that your mom is on pretty much every medication that she can be taking right now to try and control her pain, but none of that worked, right? So she was maxed out on medication. And the neurosurgeon told us our biggest fear is that when we take her off of the anesthesia, that we're not going to be able to control her pain. And that fear became a reality. So she went through the surgery and came out of came out of surgery and spent about 3 days in ICU. And typically the people who go in for this type of surgery will spend at least 24 hours in ICU. And the main purpose of that was to control her pain. So she was in really, really constant high amount of pain for a good 2.5 days till it finally came down to a level that they could control. And then of course they took her and put her on the main floor, and 3 or 4 days goes by and she starts moving bowels, and she can get out of bed, and so they send her home, and they call that a successful surgery, right? So in the back of my mind, I keep hearing this term, medical marijuana, right? Medical marijuana. And I keep pushing away because I'm like, no, that's, those are drugs. We can't, I'm not going to give my mom drugs. And it just got louder and louder and louder for me until finally one day I started, and I did Dr. Google. I'm like, Google, because I didn't know where else to find this information. It wasn't readily available for me, and I didn't really even know where to go and look for it. Thank goodness I was looking at it a few weeks before her surgery, and I ended up getting her medical marijuana card, and I got the caregiver card so that I could go to the dispensaries and get her what she needed. I didn't know what I was doing, had no idea, literally. And so I take her home. She came to, her surgery was in San Francisco, and I took her home with me to Santa Cruz, where she spent 6 weeks with me. But the very first thing I did, we walk her down and put her in the car, and I took the lidocaine patches off of her back, and I replaced them with a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD THC. I got her home, and we started playing with the different tinctures that I had. And it was pretty phenomenal that within about 3 days, my mom, who was living at a chronic, 10 plus on the pain scale, dropped down to about a 6 for the first time in a very long time. A couple days later, she was down to about a 3. And by the end of the first week, she had no pain. And she's been on a lot of medication. She's 1 week, about 2 weeks post-surgery now, with a lot of inflammation in her body. So I was super impressed. About 3 weeks later, and again, mind you, I know there's some doctors in this room. I didn't know what I was doing. Somehow, magically, about 3 weeks later, I start pulling medications off her shelf because her blood pressure comes down. The anxiety that she chronically lived with was kind of evening out. Even her pain medication, her opioids started working a lot better. And I just slowly started, at the end of 6 weeks, my mom we took about 4 or 5 medications off her shelf. And if I would have known what I know now, I wouldn't have done that because I didn't realize that she actually had to taper off of some of these. They're very dangerous drugs. So I'm not recommending this by any means. It's just the way that it happened for us. And then I started going back and I thought, what in the world just happened? Why didn't I know about this 20 years ago? And I was pissed. I was really upset because I feel that my mom probably wouldn't have had to have that surgery, at least not the way that it happened in that way, and wouldn't have had to live with that much pain. And I was angry at the world because I'm like, why isn't anybody telling me this? Why did she have to go through all that before I opened? Thank goodness that I had some interest in it. I know there's a lot of people that suffer who don't have an advocate. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm here. So we're a few years into it now, and I've taken some time to try and understand and digest some of this information so I can try and relay that to you. There's a lot of terminologies in this, so I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can. But I think you guys will follow. Up here?
No.
Ta-da, it works. All right, good. So that's me. Like I said, I live in Santa Cruz, California, so I'm happy to be down here in Palo Alto. I'm a co-business owner of this Optimal Health and Fitness, and I do run around on the beach, 3 or 4 times in the morning, 6:15 boot camp, so we get to really connect with nature out there. And I'm super interested in cellular health. That's one of my main things. I'm a chiropractor, but through this chiropractic lens, I'm really trying to understand how the body works in a physiological state as well as just the outside world as well. So I was going to say something about that. Here we go. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the history of cannabis, but I'm just going to mention a couple of things. I said a little long short because I thought maybe we didn't have that much time, and I really don't want to dive into the history of it. But it has a very extensive history. This isn't new. It's definitely new to me and my generation, but this plant has been on this earth for as long as 25 million years, they're saying. It's been around for a very, very long time. And if we look back into history, it has been used, in the Middle East. It's been used medicinally. It's been used, the Syrians used it both to, they say something like to not have like the struggles of daily life, like the way they said stuff, in different cultures. But it was kind of this idea of like, stress and anxiety is what we would call that today. Definitely, the Greeks and the Romans didn't even know the psychoactive components, or they didn't use the psychoactive, which I'm imagining they probably had higher CBD plants. We'll talk about that in a moment also. But they used it specifically just for anti-inflammatory purposes. There's a lot of documented cases. In the Indian Chinese medicine, my business partner is an acupuncturist, and she's just graduated. She's graduating this weekend, but she just turned in her dissertation today on a systematic review of how Chinese medicine and cannabis has been used. It's in all the classic textbooks. She has books that are like this big, and this thick, to have a little bit of dust on them, and she's flipping through these books, looking at all of the uses and how it's been used in Chinese medicine for years. So even here, in the United States, before 1937, before the Tax Act, the Marijuana Tax Act, industrial hemp and cannabis was used for many, many purposes. It's not always just been, as a psychoactive or a recreational use, but it's been used, as food and medicine, oil, fabrics, rope, paper. The American flag, I think the American flag was originally made out of hemp. Is that right? And all of the first like all of the dollar bills, all of them were made out of hemp. Also, the U.S. Constitution is written on hemp paper. So it has a very long history here. In the early 1950s, it's funny, I saw an Eli and Lilly, I'm pretty sure it was Eli and Lilly, has a tincture. It's a CBD THC tincture. And you turn it on the back, it says, for use in migraines, pain, and that time of month that a woman is slightly psychotic or something. The way they phrase it, but the idea is for cramps. And you could go to your pharmacist in the early 1900s, and they had prescriptions. It was part of the pharmacopoeia in this country in the early 1900s. So 1937, I don't want to get too much into that, but it all goes away, right? 1937, the Medical Marijuana Act, and they take the cannabis away, and we don't hear about it, for several years. And that's not completely true. I know there's been a lot of advocates, and that's what actually stayed around. Does anybody here use Bitmoji? What the hemp are we talking about anyways? That was just in case anyone uses Bitmojis. I wanted to play with that. So what are we talking about? When we're talking about CBD, or we're talking about cannabis, or we're talking about medical marijuana or pot or hashish, whatever it is. I grew up calling it doobies. I didn't know. We were like, doobies, They were terrible, I thought. So cannabis has three main components to it. And I'm going to talk specifically about the cannabinoids. But before I talk about the cannabinoids, I just want you to know that there's two other really important components of it. And again, this could take a very long time. I do have more time than I thought, so we could maybe get into it. But the terpenes are the oils. It's part of the oil that's in the plant. And there's so many different strains right now. And if you go to one of your dispensaries, you can ask for the profile if they happen to have it. And there's all this different essential oils that are part of the plant. And they're not specific to cannabis. You find them in plants all over. The terpenes are everywhere, so they're essential oils, basically, and it gives it its aromatic component. They're also very medicinal, and those you can look up. When you find the terpene profile of any plant, you can actually look up and see what all the terpene profile is and its qualities that it has. The flavonoids give it its pigmentation, so the color, the bright colors in some fruits, some of the vegetables. And then the cannabinoids they're one of the active components. And at this point right now, I think I have on here 90 plus. The last thing I read, I think it was about 150 different cannabinoids that have been discovered in the cannabis plant. So the first one was Raphael Mechoulam. Anyone familiar with Raphael out of Israel? He's if you want more information from this type of stuff, look up Raphael Mechoulam. He's out of Israel. He is pretty much kind of the founding father here, who made a lot of the very first discoveries that allowed us to go down this path. Of course, we have technology now, which is amazing, that's going to allow us to understand why this is making such a big deal in the body. So the first cannabinoid to be discovered in the plant is THC. So that's the psychoactive component. We know it is the main psychoactive component of the cannabis plant. And then the second one that was discovered a couple years later was CBD. And because these two are found particularly in higher ratios than any of the other cannabinoids, they were the ones that were discovered first. Right? So CBD is commonly, it is one of the non-psychoactive components of cannabis. And then you'll see on the circle out there, it's kind of hard to see this, but you'll see on the other circle out there's a couple other cannabinoids, and they're starting to test all these different cannabinoids and how they work synergistically with all of the other ones, with the terpenes and the flavonoids and the other cannabinoids. But it gets really complicated. But the reason, you guys, that we're talking about CBD today is because if you can see this area right here, all of the discoveries right now, all the testing, what they're showing us is that over and over again, we're starting to understand antibacterial, inhibits cancer cell growth, neuroprotective, so it protects the brain and the central nervous system, bone growth, so fractures, blood sugar levels, diabetes, a lot of implications here, reduces inflammation, artery blockage, I mean, just goes on and on. So this is what the research is showing us, is that as they're diving into all this research, there's so many different parts of the body that it's having at least an influence on, some kind of influence on. And I want to know why. And why is it hitting so many different parts of the body, right? So the other thing that's important to know about cannabinoids is at this point there's we can talk about 3 different types of cannabinoids. So the phytocannabinoid is from plant. So that's the extraction, the cannabinoids, the extractions that we're getting out of the plant itself. And then we have endocannabinoids. So endo is endogenous. It means the body makes it. So we actually have cannabinoids that our body endogenously make, right? And then we have the synthetic cannabinoids. So that's our pharmaceuticals that are getting involved now. So we actually do have different synthetic, man-made, laboratory-made cannabinoids that also influence the same receptors I'm going to be talking about in a minute. But I'm going to talk specifically about the phytocannabinoids and the endocannabinoids. How are we doing? Doing all right? The other thing I'm going to say real quick, side note, is that because I am a chiropractor, and an hour is a long time to be sitting in your seat, if you need to get up and move around, then please do. I do it all the time, and I will not be offended if you get up and move around. So if you need that, please do it. So the receptors. Is everyone familiar with what receptors are? We have the cell, right? And then on the outside of the cell, they're kind of like antennas, right? They're receiving parts of the cell. And so these receptors, they receive information from inside the body and outside the body. We get this information and it goes into the cell and it has an effect on what the cell's going to do. So the receptors that have been found, so first we discovered CBD and THC, right? And so if those are the main active components, the next question was, well, they must be reacting with something. And the discovery was that we have receptors in our body that directly bind these chemicals, right? And so as they begin to study these, they say, this isn't brand new. It's not something that just occurred over the last 100 years. They find that these receptors have evolved over 600 million years, and pretty much every chordate has them. Everything above the insect level, right? So everything that has a vertebra has these receptors for cannabinoids, plant and endogenous. So this is a really big deal, right? This is a really big deal that we have these receptors in our body that directly bind the plant. So this is This is an introduction to the endocannabinoid system. So we can think of, again, I said endo is endogenous. It means something that our body makes. And cannabinoids, once the discovery of the cannabinoids and then the receptors, the term stuck with, they stuck with the term endocannabinoid, and then it's a system. So you can think of it in terms like we know that we have, a cardiovascular system, and we have an endocrine system, and we have a nervous system and an immune system, right? So think of the endocannabinoid system as another system of the body that acts on multiple systems of the body and other areas of the body. The endocannabinoid system itself is the receptors that we just talked about. It is the cannabinoids, and it is all of the enzymes, right? The enzymes that are going to create and break down these different cannabinoids and the receptors themselves. So the discovery of, they call it CB1 and CB2 receptors, and there's actually two more. I don't want to get into those because it gets really confusing. But CB1 receptors, they find are in the brain and in the central nervous system. So we have receptors that are on our brain and our central nervous system, so the spinal cord and the nerves that come off the level to innervate all of our organs, right, and the muscles. They have these CB1 receptors which directly bind the cannabinoids. So they directly bind the endocannabinoids, the ones that our body makes, and the phytocannabinoids, right? And then it has a direct and immediate influence on the brain and the central nervous system. CB2, I'm going to go back to that slide. So here's some of the areas in the brain that they're testing, right? One of the biggest areas, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is for pain control, right? This is why it works so incredibly well for pain, is because a lot of the areas of the brain that control pain have a high amount of these receptors in them that directly bind, right? So the cerebellum also, which is sensory and fine-tuning movement, so a lot of work, the basal ganglia, a lot of work around multiple sclerosis, right? Trying to control the different movement patterns, the reward centers of the brain, so a lot of work around addictions, the limbic system, emotional centers of the brain. The cool thing about these receptors is that you do not find them in the respiratory part of the brainstem, right? So where opioid receptors, they're in there, and that's why there are so many fatalities, right? Because people start breathing, because once you get an overdose of the respiratory centers, the respiration stops. There's a lot of fatalities, but there aren't those receptors. The same receptors are not found in the brainstem, which means you cannot overdose on cannabis. You can have a lot, and if it has a lot of THC in it, what's going to happen? You're going to get really high, right? And the sense is that there's this impending doom. If you have way too much THC in your body, the idea is like, oh my gosh, like you can cause anxiety and you can create a lot of like really uncomfortable feelings, but you don't actually die. It cannot kill you for the same reason. So that's a really big discovery. So let me go back to this one. The CB2 receptors are found in the peripheral of the body, so more of the organ systems and the immune system. So a lot of work around the immune system. So a lot of studies trying to figure out like how do these cannabinoids, if they're on these immune system cells, how do they change the way the body is using the immune system in the body to keep it going. The endocannabinoids are the biggest class of, they're G protein-coupled receptors, but they're the biggest class of receptors that are found in the body right now. Major influences. That's why on the outside here you can see that it's literally influencing every other system. And of course we know that because this is what the body does, right? It's not like one way, but the fact that we have these receptors that maintain balance in the body, they're found in the brain, in the central nervous system, they're found in the immune system, and they're found in every organ in the body. So it is definitely having an effect in every area of the body. Homeostasis is balancing. So it's just balancing when things get overactive. The idea is we want to balance it and bring it back down. Or when things are really sluggish, right, they're not functioning, the idea is to bring it up. And the understanding is that the endocannabinoid system, that is its main job, is to bring homeostasis and balance back into the body. We doing okay? Okay, just checking. So I want to talk about three main parts. The neuroendoimmune modulators. So neuro just means brain, right? So we're talking about the brain and how it's influencing the brain. Endo is the endocrine system, so the hormone systems of the body, and then the immune system of the body. So when I say modulate, it's just maintaining balance and changing the way that these three areas of the body work. Oh, a quick word about the endocannabinoids. So have you guys heard of Ananda bliss? It's Sanskrit for bliss. So when they discovered the two, the ones that our body makes, so there's the THC, the CBD, the other cannabinoids, and then they discovered that we actually make these cannabinoids also. So they call them the endocannabinoids. Our body's making these. One of the ones is called anandamide. Okay, it's found in chocolate. Hello. What happens when you eat chocolate? Yeah, really, bliss, right? Just find the ones without a lot of sugar. It's definitely produced on meditation. So they find that your levels of anandamide rise during meditation, and it's responsible for kind of that runner's high feeling, so also higher levels of anandamide in the body through these different pathways. It acts like a neurotransmitter, and that just means a signal. So it's just a signal from the brain that this anandamide has in our body. So it's signaling patterns of the brain. The second one to be discovered is this one called 2-arachidonylglycerol. So it's 2-AG for short. It influences both the CB1 and CB2 receptors. The thing about that, so 2-AG found in animal milk, all animal milk, including breast milk, so transferred from mother to child. And one of the studies showed that when they blocked the receptors for this 2-AG, the animal models, the babies stopped suckling. So it literally, everything worked. Right, everything was functional. They test all of the different functioning part of the suckling mechanism, but they lost their desire to suckle. So they call this more the motivation molecule, right? And to think that we have these, the anandamide, the bliss, it's endogenous, we're supposed to make it, and then we have this motivation molecule, and then we look at the state of the world today, we start to ask questions like, are we not producing these enough? Right? Do we not have these high levels of endogenous anandamide and bliss molecules in our body? And why for so many years we could supplement, when things got a little rough. So just, I guess the idea with this is just like the endocannabinoid system, it's stimulating so many different parts of the body. The ones that are left out here, this, heartless person here. We should put a little heart in there because it does actually influence the heart as well. And the other one is the skeletal, so the bones. There's an article, 2005, Kaplan or something. Anyways, that shows that CBD cannabidiol actually changes or influences the bones during fractures and breaks. So it really helps the bone actually heal a lot faster. In this country right now, we know that it's illegal in sporting events, right? So you can't have any levels of any of the cannabinoids in your body, if you're sporting, but all these fractures that we're getting, it's like at some point, hopefully, once we start to wake up and really see this, it might be at some point that it's going to be a part of healing these fractured bones in sporting events. That's what I'm hoping anyways, and many other things, of course. So how the heck does this work, right? All this information, anandamide and 2-AG and the endocannabinoid system. So what's actually happening? Let's see if I can get this part of it through. So what's happening is so I want to talk specifically about CBD. So CBD is cannabidiol. It's the non-psychoactive component of cannabis. And they used to think that CBD comes in and actually directly binds these receptors, and they've found that it doesn't bind it. CBD has a very low affinity. It doesn't want to bind these. What it does is it comes into the system and it changes the way these receptors are binding every other part. So the neurotransmitters, the hormones, it's changing the way the cannabinoids are binding. It's up-leveling some of the receptors where it needs to be up-leveled. It's making more receptors where there's not enough activity. It's shutting down some other receptors in other parts of the body and the brain when there's too much activity. CBD is coming into the system and changing the receptors, changing the hormones. It's a main modulator. It's orchestrating and conducting this massive change back into homeostasis, into balance in the body. I'm going to talk about three main things. So that's what I was trying to say earlier. I'm going to talk about endocannabinoid tone. Still a lot of words. I hope this is okay, but I'm going to continue to explain them. So we're going to talk about endocannabinoid tone. We're going to talk about gene transcription modulation and then brain inflammation. So so endocannabinoid tone, the guy to follow for endocannabinoid tone is this guy, Dr. Ethan Russo. So he wrote an article, it was a review back in 2004, or 2004, and he's maybe a month away from the next one, 14 years later, right? So he has a lot of really great information about what this means. Like, he says that every human has like this baseline of endocannabinoids. So tone just means like, is there too much, is it like screaming, or is it like you can't hear it, like there's not enough, right? So he's saying every human, we don't know how much, and who has a lot and who doesn't have enough. There's no way of actually testing it, but his theory, and it is a theory, but really awesome theory, is that maybe this tone is out of balance, right? And in a lot of times really deficient. Like we're not hearing, our own endocannabinoids anymore. And he's coined the term clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, meaning there's just not enough. And what happens, and what a lot of the studies are showing, is when you don't have the higher levels of the 2-AG and the anandamide, a lot of thresholds are lowered. So we know this in seizures for sure. Right, so Charlotte's Web. Has everyone seen the movie Weed? W-E-E-D. Dr. Sanjay Gupta. It's a documentary, and a lot of the work coming from that and the studies out of Israel with Raphael Meshulam is understanding that when the levels are low of our endogenous cannabinoids, we lower the pain threshold lowers, seizure thresholds lower. A lot of different things are lowered in the body. He's studying and looking at specifically migraines, fibromyalgia, and irritable bowel. So really good information there. But what's happening is when CBD comes into the body, the really cool thing it does is the very first thing it does is it heightens the levels of 2-AG in the body. So it goes right after the 2-AG pathways and turns on our own ability to do this mechanism the way it's been designed to do, and it stops the breakdown of anandamide. So it doesn't actually turn on anandamide, but it stops the breakdown of anandamide, so you start to get this nice pooling of anandamide if you eat chocolate and meditate or other things that excite the anandamide levels. But the idea is that, so the 2-AG, so CBD comes into the system and heightens it turns it on, and then it goes and does the other stuff. But it's immediately allowing our body to work better. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of research around the idea of like addictions, with different cannabis forms of getting cannabis in your body, and like, is it addictive? But they're showing it's not typically addictive in a sense that's physiologically addictive, but because the first thing it's doing is making your body work better. You don't require more of it. It wants more 2-AG and more anandamide. Your endogenous system starts working a lot better. So he has some really good information around CBD. This can be confusing, so you don't have to read all that. Genes are a blueprint, right? We know, so we have our cells, right? And then we have the nucleus inside, and then inside the nucleus we have genes. And when we need something to happen, the genes they'll unwind and they'll expose like different gene sequences, right? And some protein comes in and it looks for the region that it's, trying to build a protein or something, and then it reads it and then closes it back up. But genes on their own don't do anything, right? So they have to be read, and that's what transcription is. So genes being read, and then modulation. What this study showed right here is how CBD is modulating or deciding or changing the way some of these genes are being read. The big question that it was asking is, I don't know if you guys have heard this question comes up for me a lot. I heard you have to have THC, in order for CBD to work or to function. And that's what this article was actually trying to answer that question. And what they found, before we talk about how cool it is with the gene transcription, reading specific genes, 680 gene pathways were upregulated or turned on with CBD alone, no THC, right? So this is CBD on its own versus 58 pathways that were turned on for THC. So THC is not needed to make these major changes in the body. The other thing that it did, 524, it turned off. CBD gets into the body and it turns off, and the main ones that it's turning off is your pro-inflammatory cytokine, so it's shutting down the main inflammation pathways in the body. The main ones that it was turning on, the 680 different gene expression pathways that it was turning on, was your antioxidant pathways. So allowing your body to start functioning and cleaning and clearing up. Pretty fabulous. So much broader effect, CBD, than THC. That's why I like talking about it. I'm not saying that, I obviously, I had to use THC with my mom, and we like THC, right? But the idea of thinking that you need THC is incorrect. We use it, to get the lowest influence that your body needs. Do you have a question?
Sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to ask questions, but the endocannabinoids, how and where are they made in the body?
They're made mostly, oh yeah. So, thank you. So she was asking where the endocannabinoids are made in the body, and they're made in the brain. They're made in the brain. They're made on demand, and they don't stay very long in the brain, but they're made on demand, have immediate influence, and they're typically broken down pretty quick. They're made in the brain, different areas of the brain.
If you want to have a question, just have them raise their hand, and I'll get a microphone to them.
Okay. So this is what it's showing. So what CBD is doing, it's coming into the body, and it's saying, what do we need to change? What do we need to regulate? Turning on pathways and turning off pathways. On its own is this main conducting system. The other thing is that the 2AG, the endogenous one, works very similar to CBD. So the more CBD you take, the more you start to bring your body into balance, the less you actually need. Your body doesn't need it, so it just, and we're paying a high premium for CBD in this country, so it's really important to pay attention to your symptoms, because typically what I'm noticing is a lot of these symptoms start to even out, they start to balance out. That's what happened with my mother anyways. Does that make sense? Here's a question over here. Hi.
I have a question about the glutathione. Do you mean the glutathione system strongly upregulated or unregulated? Can you talk more about that? Because I'm very interested.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We love glutathione. Yes, we do. So glutathione has, in order to get glutathione in all of the different pathways, you have to turn on somewhere around 300 to 400 different expressions of genes, right? So little sequences of genes, so that you can get all the enzymes, you can get the proteins, you can get all the different things that it takes to make that pathway function. And one of the things that we're starting to understand a little bit now more is if you're familiar with the NRF2, that's the main one, right? That's the main one that can come in and it just turns on all of those pathways for you. What CBD does is it's coming in, it's igniting that NRF2 pathway. So it's doing it through turning on, helping NRF2 and turning on all the expressions and doing a few of them on their own also. So it's basically just up-regulating the ability of our bodies to make glutathione and to make it efficient in the body also. It's a really great article. I think everyone should actually pick this up and read it. It's a really fantastic article. We have another.
Is that a typo on your slide then? Because it says unregulated. Do you mean to say upregulated?
That should say upregulated. Thank you. Yes. Okay, got it. Yeah, that is a typo. Thank you. Can you write that down for me so I can change that? Thank you. It's going to upregulate it in a very beautiful, beautiful way. That was your question. Okay. And then again, downregulating all of our inflammatory pathways. So again, trying to bring the body back into balance. Really great article. Oh, you said the article is called, it's the one at the top. It's out of the British Journal of Pharmacology. I want to say this is it's a 2004. It's a 2004 out of the British Journal of Pharmacopoeia, and it's called Differential Transcription Profiles Mediated by Exposure to the Cannabinoids Cannabidiol Delta-9 THC. BB2 microglial cells, brain stuff also. How are we doing on time? Doing okay? Okay. Anybody watch the movie Concussion. Will Smith. If you haven't seen it, watch it. I tried not to watch it, but I knew that I had to. I learned about concussions in chiropractic school and what it's doing to the brain. And I also love football. I love football, but I haven't watched, maybe I watched 2 games, but I haven't watched very many games since I watched that movie. I can't support it. Can't support it. It's one of my favorite games. So the movie Will Smith, they're talking about the young football players, that have a career lifespan of about, 3 to 6 years. And then they get tossed out and they have zero support. So it was following one kid in particular, a couple kids in particular, and Will Smith was the physician in this, and he was really advocating. And he's the one that found out the chronic traumatic encephalitis, so pretty much brain inflammation. Definitely watch it. It'll be worth your time, and hard to support that game that I love so much. Actually, I'm coming back to that. Here's a follow-up to that. So this is 2017, so July 2017, there was a follow-up. And this was JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. They were studying, this was a follow-up, so they studied 202 deceased football players. It was a brain donation study. So these deceased football players donated their brains. And of those 202 players, 177, so 87% of them showed some sign of brain injury, brain damage. And 110 of them were former NFL players. So all the other ones, the ones that weren't NFL players, they were, some little, like the little ones, and then some high school, some recreational, just under the National Football League. And then the other 100 were the National Football League. And of the former NFL, of course, 99% of them showed signs of so brain injury, basically. So there's few criticisms with this article, but still very telling. Still looking at this information, you can formulate your own ideas about that. But mood and behavior, cognitive dysfunction, dysmension, what happens with the brain inflammation, it starts slow sometimes. We don't even know that it's happening sometimes. It starts with like mood behaviors, and I don't feel good, and I have like brain fog, and some kind of like I'm just angry, and I don't know what to do about it. And it goes all the way through just like this really traumatic, fiery behavior that happens all the way through dementia and suicide. So really important to look at some of that stuff. But the reason I bring that up anyways is because you don't have to be an NFL player to experience this. A lot of these studies showing, anybody here ever been exposed to mercury? Yeah. Anyone here? I'm from Santa Cruz, so I always whisper this. Like, you don't have to tell me if you did, but anybody here doesn't eat organic all the time? I don't want to see it. Glyphosate is Monsanto, right? So it's our Roundup. A lot of mold toxins, a lot of limes, on the East Coast coming over the West Coast and everywhere in between. Anybody here have a cell phone or use the internet? There's a lot of exposures, a lot of different exposures, right? Dysbiotic toxins is just an imbalance in our microbiome. That's why we talk a lot about inflammation in the gut. So let's see if I can explain what's happening here. So on this side over here, this is a brain cell. It's a microglia. Over here is a nerve cell. So what happens is these triggers, trying to keep it as simple as we can, we get these exposures. We have these triggers. And what they do is they come in and they trigger that microglia. And what it does is that cell then goes in and it starts sending out all of these signals to the neuron. And it excites it. This is involved in the glutamate receptors are part of this. So it excites it. You guys read A Taste, what is it? The Taste That Kills? What's his name? Taste That Kills. This is where I first started learning about excitotoxins. But anyways, MSG. But anyways, it comes in, it excites these glutamate receptors, and then the brain cell dies, right? Because it can't stand it. It can't handle that much excitement. And it's a lot of the toxicity, but when this brain cell dies, it then releases all of these other chemicals, and it triggers that, this microglia over here. It triggers inflammation in there. And then you just get this cycle that happens. It's continuous. It goes on and on and on and on. And before you know it, we have a brain on fire, right? And some people, it's very low level. And for some people, it's very high level, right? And then there's everything in between. The information is that CBD, a lot of the articles, I can send you some of these articles also. If you guys want some of these, I don't cite them because it gets really confusing. There's a lot of words on the screen and we can't focus on it. But if anybody wants these articles, they're so brilliant. They're so great. So if you like reading these, I'm happy to send you a list of them. I have a paper over here. You can just put your email on there and tell me, you want more information or whatever it is, or just the slide presentation or just the articles themselves. And I'm happy to send it to you. But really great information how CBD is coming in and quieting down these glutamate receptors. It's shutting down glutamate, the excitability of these glutamate receptors, and at the same time shutting off this chronic inflammatory response. Again, upregulating how many, 540 or 504 different pathways and shutting down another 300. It's shutting down all this pro-inflammatory process, not just systemically, but also in our brain. So quieting the brain, bringing the brain back into balance so we can think a little bit clearer, mental clarity, so we can behave sometimes even a little bit better, so we can think about the way we're behaving, what's it going to take, but just really trying to bring like that anxiety that sometimes is kind of low level and sometimes really high, just trying to bring that into balance. We're good? Okay, I'm going to move on. So the main three things that I found, I keep hitting the mic, sorry. The main three things that I think that are fascinating and interesting to me is the endocannabinoid tone, right? So really changing the way our body's using our own endocannabinoids, bringing that back into balance. The second one is the way it's changing genes, the expression of genes in our body. There's a lot of work around cancer and changing the way that cancer is expressed also. And then quieting the inflammation in the brain. So three main things. And then it goes on and on and on from there. So without getting too boring, that's that one. I'm just going to touch on some of these. And again, if you want the articles on these, I'm happy to send them to you. But a lot of work in GI and digestion. We know that CBD, 2-AG, not so much anandamide, or somewhat THC also, but it's really involved with motility. It's the propulsion, trying to get that food and all of that motility going through. So a lot of work around that, and secretions, modulating appetite. We know that THC is a huge conductor of that, right? So very useful in cancer treatment, anorexia, eating disorders, reduction of nausea. I took this with my aunt, my dear sweet aunt, Norma Wright. She had stage 4 cancer by the time I found out, and this was about 3 months ago. And I took, we're on camera. Well, anyways, I took her somewhere, wherever she is, somewhere where it was not legal, because she was just to the stage where she wasn't eating, and I know the way that it influences the body, and I know that there's people all over the world right now that that could use this. And right now it's in synthetic form, so she was given dronabinol, it's closed, just high THC. It made her so sick. So CBD, the beautiful thing about CBD is, again, because it's a main modulator. This is something that you guys could know. Just reminded me. If you happen to take too much THC, I don't know if that's ever happened to anyone in this room. It doesn't feel good, right? CBD as a main modulator will come into the system and it'll pluck the THC off of those CB1 receptors in your brain, that the psychosis, the psychoactivity plucks it off, right? And it shuttles it over to your CB2 receptors, so more peripheral and organ systems, so you get more of a therapeutic effect and less of a psychoactive effect. And that's what it's doing for, again, like all of these different systems, the neurotransmitters, the hormones, like wherever it's needed, it'll do that. So if you ever happen to get too high and you don't like it, just add some CBD and bring that calming back down so you don't feel like this psychotic, like impending doom. This is really good for teenagers, for parents of teenagers to have some CBD on hand, right? Because those poor little fellows are so inexperienced. I mean, that would have been me, so inexperienced. And now the levels of THC, everything in this country and the world is bred for high levels of THC. We've lost so much of our plant source, the plant that had, a nice balance of the CBD and THC. And it's so bred right now for high levels of THC. So we do have to be very careful about what cannabis we're using, especially well, not especially, but everyone. But I think about the young ones because I've heard some horror stories. Anyways, okay. So Crohn's, obesity, diabetes is a lot of work. Liver, again, this comes from that study, the one that I said everyone should read. And I say that about every study I come across, actually, but that one with the gene transcription. So some of the really cool things they're showing is that it's actually changing. So some of the scarring in the liver, it's changing that fibrosis in the liver. So I can't fully remember what this was on mice, and they induced, like they gave them a whole bunch of ethanol, these poor little mice. It's hard to read some of these studies, but it gives us really great information. And it just literally turned around these pathways, these pathologies in the liver. Again, turning on, and one of the main reasons is because it's the glutathione that's activated. They're really clearing out all of the toxins so that the liver can actually function a lot better. Pain management. I think this is probably why it's so well known right now. Also the seizures. So Charlotte's Web, you guys have to take a look at that documentary, Weed. But also pain management. This is why I got so involved in this. And we have an epidemic right now, and we all know that. We have a very, very big opioid epidemic. What are we going to do about that? They're starting to crack down on the distribution of opioids, but they don't give our people another alternative. It's just cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting it back, which I think is really important, but where's the alternative? Like, how can we help people who are actually in pain and probably going to be in pain for the rest of their lives? You don't just take away the opioids. You got to give them an alternative, right? So again, these receptors, the CB1 receptors, CBD and THC is influencing on a very large scale all of the nociceptors. So that's the pain areas of the brain. And it's involved in so many different areas in the spinal cord and the thalamus. There's all these different areas that are influenced. So we change not only just the perception of pain, so changing the way that the brain is perceiving pain, but actually changing the pathways themselves from many different levels, not just cutting into one pathway. We're not just breaking one pathway, we're changing all of the different pathways in the body, many of them. This study, really good, Martin, 1996, I did put that one in there because I thought it was fabulous. When they studied this area, the ventroposterolateral part of the thalamus, they found that CBD was 10-fold more potent than morphine on a very large scale. And this is a great implication. We can use these together. CBD changes the way that opioids are processed in the body. It actually makes them work better. This is why it works so good for my mom. This is why I was able to start taping her off of these opioids, because the CBD and the THC was changing all of these expressions in her body, but her opioids were working better. She didn't need them, so we started tapering those off also. And her depression and anxiety and blood pressure, like so many different ones also. Really good for nerve pain, you guys, really, really good for nerve pain. Mental health. So when your body perceives fear, question over here?
So I'll yell.
Okay.
How do you know what the dose should be of the CBD for
I can repeat
pain
it.
management or anything like that?
So the question is, how should you know the dose management for whatever the condition is or issue? So I'm gonna hang on to that question. I do want to answer that, and I want to do it at the end for that particular question, because it's very complicated, unfortunately, and maybe not. So it just depends on who you are. So the mental health part of it, when your body perceives fear, the amygdala, this is one of the centers of the brain that produces anandamide. The levels of anandamide drop in your body. And then when the levels of anandamide drop in your body, your perception, it triggers, the sympathetic nervous system, and it's very hard to get out of that chronic, sympathetic-driven state. They say sympathetic state, when you start triggering the pathways like we saw in the neuroinflammatory pathways, the inflammation in the brain, same thing with our sympathetic system. It's like constantly having, your foot on the gas and out the brake at the same time. You're just we're trying to get somewhere and you're not moving for anywhere, but you're just constantly revved and revved and revved. This is chronic sympathetic driven bodies. And when we're experiencing fear or anxiety or stress, our anandamide levels drop. That's why meditation is so good. You bring those levels right back up. But now we're in the cycle, and it triggers fear responses. It triggers our ability to forget, even. So we're constantly recycling that. Anandamide in the brain allows you, it changes your short-term memory, so you're not recycling over and over again, especially areas events that cause fear. A lot of work around, so PTSD, this reminds me again of Dr. Sanjay Gupta, so that documentary that he did 3 of them. The second one, they talked a lot about PTSD, so our vets that are coming home from war and doing some research around how it's really helping them deal with some of this PTSD and a lot of other triggers that's happening for our vets. Schizophrenia, I put that one on there. That one's a difficult one, again, because of the THC, because of the THC in particular, and sometimes even the CBD. So there's a lot of studies around that, but it's not so straight and narrow, and neither is anything, really. Opiate withdrawal, alcoholism, again, because we're changing the rewards pathway in the brain. And anxiety, just leveling, quieting the brain. So we're not so fearful and anxious all the time. Brain health, neurogenesis, and brain plasticity. We were told for years, we thought we would never be able to generate new brain cells. That's not true. We certainly can regenerate new brain cells. New pathways to the brain. A lot of work around Alzheimer's. A lot of work around Alzheimer's, really good stuff. Also, I'm following, Thomas Seyfried, who I'm super excited that's coming in June, and, following the metabolic theories also, the changing, yes?
Can you expand a little bit more on the Alzheimer's and the effectiveness of it?
I don't, all I can say right now about Alzheimer's is they're trying to change, they're looking at the way, one, the plaques, but two, there's a very specific pathway that they're looking at. Let me get you the studies, because I can't fully remember what the different pathways are. But I think part of it is the inflammation, but there's very particular pathways, but they're looking specifically at all the inflammation, that cyclic inflammation in the brain. So if we can turn off the inflammation in the brain, we can change a lot of the neurodegenerative diseases. Parkinson's, my aunt has been diagnosed with Parkinson's. She's in Utah, and I took her some CBD, and she went to her neurosurgeon and asked her neurosurgeon if she should be taking that, and he said no. I made a special trip out there, but guess what? My grandma's taking it. She's 92 years old, and my other aunt is taking it. So it was successful in that sense, and I'm hoping that eventually she'll give it a try. No THC in that one, just CBD, because it is Utah. Seizure disorders, of course, changing serotonin and dopamine, the neuroprotective pathways of the brain. A lot of brain health stuff. This is where I can talk about some of this, about your question. The delivery methods, it can get so confusing. I mean, it used to be so easy, right? You just smoke some. How easy is that? Just take a little hit, see if it works. If it gets you too high, you go to sleep maybe, or you run around. The thing is because it's changed so much, I'm having a hard time with, the legalization, of course, because it's changing everything, but I think it's so important also the regulation. Like, we need regulation, but the reason we're having to have this regulation now is because all of our plants have changed. They've just been bred for this high THC content. So it's hard to find strains that haven't been changed that have high CBD content. They are available, but they're very hard to find in their natural state. So we have to start changing some of or modifying some of these genes, unless we're using hemp, of course, to get the CBD, high levels of CBD. So yeah, of course, you can inhale it, you can smoke it, you can vape it. There's I don't know how much we want to be putting, smoke into our lungs, at some point. That's why the tinctures are available. And in the early 1900s, they were tinctures. I'm sure they have been throughout history for a very long time also. So you can extract the oils and get some of the tincture out of there. Nanotechnology, some of the guys around here that are doing glutathione, guys and gals that are doing the glutathione nano. Nano it's also in a tincture form, but they take a little liposome. It has a phosphobilayer, and it pretty much, they make it super, super small. So nano is a unit in size. They make it super, super small. They take the CBD or your cannabinoids or whatever you need, and they put it into this little liposome, and then it can diffuse through the mucosal membranes, whether it's the oral mucosa or going down through the throat and the stomach. Like it's just, you get so much more in that way. Quicksilver does a lot of that. Tinctures, of course, in alcohol-based forms. Ingested, I never gave one of these to my mom because it has sometimes like this double effect, right? Because it changes as you're breaking down THC in your system. I think the liver converts it to a second form of THC, and I can't remember what it is. It's like delta 8 or something THC, but then it gives you a second kick. So you've heard of people who've like taken their brownie and they're like 2 hours later, they're like, nothing's happening. So they take a little bit more and all of a sudden it's like, bam, and it lasts 12, 16 hours. That's why you have your CBD on hand. Offset that, right? Topical, there's CB1 and CB2 receptors in our skin. There's a lot of studies around acne and skin dermatitis. I have a little mole back here, and I'm testing it on this one, and it's actually, and it's just a balm that I have. It has THC and CBD in it, and it's getting smaller and smaller. I have a colleague and friend who had this really big mole. And it had like molds underneath it. I should ask her exactly what it is. And she's been rubbing some THC CBD balm, and it's gone. And that's why I decided I wanted to try it on this, because with the CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors in the skin, absorb it really rapidly. It doesn't get into your bloodstream, so it works on a very superficial layer. So maybe some of it's absorbed, but not very much. That's why you can take THC and rub it on your skin and don't have to worry about getting blood tested. And it's not going to get into your blood that quick, or really that efficiently. It's just going to work on a level. So topicals are really, really great. Transdermal patches, they last a little longer, 8 to 12 hours. The ones that I used for my mom, I put them on the inside of her ankle and sometimes on her wrist. And we'd leave them there for about 12 hours. I use different ratios. So a lot of different ways to get it in. It gets really confusing. As far as dosing, it's hard to know. The way I did it, I can only tell you the way I did it with my mom. And I started what I thought was very low. THC. She's never taken THC. She never had alcohol, but she had a lot of drugs, right? So I didn't know how this was going to influence her. But we started really low. I started with like a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD THC. I only used the tinctures for her and the transdermal patches, and now I use topical. But when I first started with her, we were just using the tinctures. And the idea is to start low and titrate up with both CBD and THC, because you don't know how your body's going to react to it. You don't know how much you need, and there's no sense in taking more than what you need. Even with CBD, it doesn't have a psychoactive component, but it's so expensive. If you start really low and then just move wait half a day, or just depending on what your condition is. Like if you need some pretty immediate pain with relief, like with her, I was trying like every 2 hours and trying to get it in between her own medications. Never at the same time, because I didn't know. But I want to say I started with like a 1-to-1 ratio, and I was doing like 1 drop. Like 1 drop under the tongue. They have the little rubber things, and I'd see how she felt. I also had a straight THC tincture that was pretty much all THC, and then I had a CBD. And so it's basically the idea is you start slow and you work your way up, and you wait till you see some kind of effect with it. What I keep hearing is that people who experience anxiety are that's one of the quickest, within an hour, or less. So if you are someone with anxiety, you can try that. And what I hear a lot of people say, like, I tried CBD and it doesn't work. I tried that, it doesn't work. You didn't get enough, I think. You didn't get enough. So some people are gonna, some of the people that I work with, again, I can't give you advice on like how to do it, but I'll just tell you, some of the people that I work with, I have them start with just a little bit, and then some people are taking, I'm gonna call them pumps of CBD, and they might need 8 pumps, in the first 4 hours of their morning. I have other people that might do 2 pumps. And I'm telling these people that have to have, or are using high amounts of it, to do that for, try it for an extended period of time, and then try and bring yourself down off of it, The idea is we're hoping the body eventually will catch on. There's a sweet spot with THC. There's just a sweet spot. If you want to use THC medicinally and not get high off of THCs, for some people that's part of the medicine, right? But for some people, if you want to be very functional, then the idea is to start really, really low, a couple of milligrams, and then and depending on how you're ingesting it, how you're getting it, then maybe 4 hours later or 6 hours later, you try a little bit more. But when CBD doesn't, specifically CBD, when you say it doesn't work, I say take more. Find a dose that actually works for you. Is that helpful?
So I'm surprised you say you started with the 1-to-1.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm surprised you say you started with a 1-to-1. I went to the dispensary for the first time before my back surgery, and the woman there said, oh, we have this 25 CBD to 1 THC thing, and that's what you should use
Yeah.
because you don't want to get high, you just want the anti-inflammatory. So if you're trying to deal with the pain or inflammation, why would you not go to
Like a lower.
a very low THC,
Yeah.
very high CBD ratio?
I did it for several reasons. I did get my mom high quite a few times by accident. I didn't mean to, but she went flying. I think that was part of her therapy, but I didn't mean to do that. The reason I had the pure CBD is so that I could try and offset a little bit. So I started with the 1-to-1 because she had high amounts of pain, really high amounts of pain, and she had nerve pain. She had a lot of her pain was not just inflammation, but was also nerve pain. So I was told by some of the people that are trying to help me that in order to try and settle down specifically her nerve pain was to administer some THC, because that's going to help way more than just the CBD. The CBD is going to help with inflammation. THC in particular is going to help with nerve pain. So that's why I started with the 1-to-1 with her, is so that I could try and get some of that nerve pain. And when I sent her flying, I didn't know about the CBD, but I would just give her a little bit more of the CBD because I thought it would just dilute it, is what I was thinking. But it turns out it actually plucks it off. But yeah, and it was a game. Like there's no handbook right now, unfortunately. There's no handbook. But I would say, yeah, I mean, over and over again, like every expert that I've listened to and talked to and read, they say just start low. And for me, that was low, I thought, for her. And it worked well for her. But she had a lot of nerve pain also. And eventually, we didn't need that much. She doesn't do a lot of 1-to-1 now. She does a lot of CBD. All right. Are we almost there?
About 7 minutes.
7 minutes,
And
okay.
then 5 minutes of questions, or if you want to do questions.
Okay, where'd you go? Okay, who's talking to me? I'm like that Bitmoji. What the? Sorry. All right. So I do want to talk about cautions and contraindications. The pleasants and I threw some of these in today, so the slides aren't. I kind of messed up this slide a lot, but yeah, the cautions for pleasant sensations. Mild euphoria. This is very therapeutic for some people, right? Relaxation, enhanced sensory output. Really great for a lot of people. But sometimes, we have to remember that, yeah, you can get some unpleasant, especially if we're doing, different levels of THC. CBD doesn't typically cause psychoactive unpleasantries, right? Because it's working on so many different parts of the body, and it's not actually binding those receptors that are in the brain. But there is some, people have reported that they do experience heightened anxiety. You have to watch for this, with your different ratios and tinctures, disorientation, paranoia, psychosis. This is why my aunt one who passed from cancer, she wouldn't continue because she was given the dronabinol and it sent her flying. She never touched it again. So, and when you've felt that, typically, we lose people there because they're afraid to try it again. Even just the straight CBD, she was just really afraid. So that's why I say make sure you have plenty of CBD on hand. Slurred speech, dizziness, impaired balance, dry mouth, of course, hunger, you get the munchies, right? For some people that's very therapeutic, for some people they don't want that. So it's just good to know some of these things also. Adolescent use. The young ones, especially when they're doing higher levels of THC, there is some studies that are coming out that are showing that it is changing the brain, the way that the brain functions. So we have to be careful with the young ones. Not so much CBD, but more the THC, the plant, the smoking in particular. So this isn't my specialty. I don't know the laws very well, but I thought I'd throw these slides in. So I'm just going to go through them really quick because this is stuff that we'll have to look on the internet because I don't know it very well, and then I'll open it up for questions. But as of January 2018, half of the states in the U.S. have legalized either medicinally or recreationally. So definitely a lot more awareness, right? A lot more awareness. It is still a Schedule 1. So cannabis is still, medical marijuana is still scheduled as a Schedule 1 by the U.S. government. And what that means is it's a drug or substance that has a high potential for abuse. It has no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States. A drug or substance which is unsafe for use under medical supervision. So it's still legal, federally scheduled as a Schedule 1. Let me show you that, though. Again, I'm not trying to, I'll let you guys do whatever you want with this information. But the U.S. government has a federal patent on CBD. Did you guys know that? The U.S. government has a federal patent on the use of CBD specifically as an antioxidant. So hello, upregulating all of our antioxidant pathways. We know this. And as a neuroprotectant, so quieting the brain. We know that it's very protective for the brain, and it's very good for clearing the body, all these antioxidant pathways. And here we have a U.S. government that has a patent, but still Schedule 1 drug. So I'll let you play with that information. California law, we passed with the Compassionate Use Act in 1996 for use as medical cannabis, and then of course, as of January 1st this year, it is also recreational. So what does it mean for recreational marijuana use? I wrote these things down. So adults 21 and over can buy up to 1 ounce of cannabis. This is if you don't have a medical marijuana card. If you have a medical marijuana card, it's the same as before. You can go in and get, I don't know what the limit is, or there might not be a limit. I've gotten a lot of it. But if you're using it recreationally, you can get up to 1 ounce. And you can only get it from the dispensaries. You need a valid ID or license. Really interesting, the cash system. A lot of the banks still won't use CBD money. I sold a bottle, my colleague sold a bottle through, I think it was PayPal or Square or one of these merchants, these online merchants. They took her account because it said CBD oil on it. It was happening all over the place. So banks around the United States still aren't doing it. I think some of these major companies have to go to Mexico and other countries because the U.S. banks won't recognize it. So when you go to the dispensary, they typically will require some kind of cash, or you can use your debit card, but they run it in a funny way and they give you back change. It's kind of strange. But hopefully this will all be changing. Just a little bit of pretty colors for you here. It's a lot of talk, a lot of information. Some of it seems kind of depressing, but yet it's super exciting because all of you guys are here tonight, and we are understanding this more. There's so much more interest in cannabis, in use medicinally and where it's going. So I super appreciate everyone being here, and I do hope that you learned something. You can see in here, this is from Leafly. They're also a really, really good resource for you. But even just here, there's pain and sleep, gastrointestinal, mood and behavior, neurological, and other. These are some of the areas that are being studied. Of course, so many more other areas are being studied, more outside of the United States than in the United States, and I'm hoping that'll change. But even on the outside out here, there's migraines, headaches, cramps, sleep apnea, cancers, ALS. I didn't even talk about cancer, but there's so much research on cancer. Multiple sclerosis, depression, PTSD. You guys, in the center there, it is, all the different cannabinoids that are being studied, and that's a short list. It's not complete by any means. So there is definitely this synergistic effect that happens when you have your plant medicine, the whole plant itself, because it works synergistically with all the other different cannabinoids, the terpenes, and the flavonoids. So just some pretty stuff there for you to look at, a lot of information. Here's my disclaimer. I have to say it, right? This is educational. I really do hope that you learned something from this. If you have questions, we're going to do questions, I guess, for a few more minutes.
We'll have about 5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
But I get the first one. Who's the best dealer in town?
What brands do you recommend? Are they all about the same quality? There's a lot of conferences, there's a lot of CBD peddlers, and what's what?
That's a tough question because there's so many right now. There's so many different products available out there. I try to do my best to study them. I really like the nanotechnology. I like Quicksilver. I like, some of Prime My Body. I think yeah. And the reason that I like that one is, again, because we're paying such a high premium right now for CBD in this country. And what I have learned, this is the one that I have my mom on specifically for CBD, is because it's so efficient to get into the body, she needs a lot less. So the absorption rate between nanotechnology and your regular tinctures is, the difference is like 6%, 6 to 10%, versus like 95 plus absorption.
So is that Quicksilver?
Quicksilver or Prime My Body, yeah. If it's Prime My Body, yeah. Prime, My Body. I'm super happy to send anybody information on those, on some of my favorite ones. Those are my favorite ones, but not everyone, we have to find one that works with people, so I try different ones. But I really do like that one, and I'm happy to send you guys very specific information on some of these products. If you leave your email here with me, then I can send you all that information so you can try some of these, and see how they work for you, see how they work for their family members. What I'm noticing is that people come to these events because it's either themselves or somebody that they really, really care about. And this is, I'm coming from the heart. So I really am coming to share good information, and I've been doing my own research to find out, which ones work. And my mom, she's such a sweet, 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 sweet little lady. She allows me to try these on her because she gives me this information. She is struggling. She is struggling, and she's one of my most important people on this planet. So I use some of this information, and she gives it back to me, but because I feel good, so it does, I'm just yeah, that's great. But I get a really good feedback from my mother. So I'm happy to continue to share this information and everything that I've learned and send you information if you leave me your email, and I can send you all that information on the Prime My Body and the Quicksilver and some of the other ones that I really like.
There have been some studies that have observed that in the states that have medical marijuana, Medicaid costs are significantly lower, especially for pain medication. Just comment?
I'm glad that you said that, and I'm not surprised. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could really change the way that this country is run, but of course there's a lot of, we could talk about that for a long time. It is changing. Things are changing. We're going in the right direction.
I love Prime My Body. That's my favorite one. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
I'm a personal trainer, and I have all my clients take it because all my clients are stressed or commuting. But another thing I use the CBD for is I've been giving it to my dog.
Yeah.
And I have a French bulldog. He's a bomb.
Yeah.
But he gets a little crazy and he gets a little anxious sometimes, when we're not together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's been really helping him out, and it makes him eat better. And
Yeah.
he's been putting on weight. And it's also, you didn't really talk about it, but it's also really good for kids. I know a lot of my My friends who have crazy kids have been giving them a little bit of the CBD, and it's night and day, especially for the boys who are just running around. But yeah, I think that's something really important to be talking about as well, for animals too, and for seniors, for senior pets.
Thank you, absolutely. So my sweet little Snowball, she was a Westie, 15 years old. She just passed in December, but she started with the limping and I give both of my dogs. I have had two Westies. I have one now, but I've been giving them CBD also, and they respond. Again, everything above an insect has these receptors, right? So all chordates, everything with a vertebra has these receptors, so it can influence them as well. Primary body, and a lot of these CBD, depending on the amount of THC, they are approved for infants, babies. 2 AG is passed from the mother to child through breast milk. We're working on the receptors, working on the way the body works. So if you do high levels of CBD, no THC, we can influence the way our kids are experiencing life right now, because a lot of those factors that I was showing you about the brain inflammation, they're all involved in that. So really good. I have a lot of kids, a lot of my, between 6 and 16 on CBD products, and it's incredibly safe.
Should we look for organic
Yes,
version of it?
I think
or-
so. So coffee, cannabis are two of they're basically unregulated, but have the highest amount of mold in them. So much mold in our coffee and on our cannabis. So I third-party test anything before I give it to my mom. So I take the substance, I take it to Santa Cruz Labs, which is right in Santa Cruz, which is where I live, and I have them test it and I always get the information from the company themselves. I can't remember whatever it is of the sheet, but then I third-party test it because organic is very, very important.
And they have 3 different levels, right? Or 4 different levels they show in the,
Of what?
like economy, some premium.
Yes. Yeah, not
elite
just
or
the
whatever.
pesticides, but yeah, changing the way that,
Is there a difference, in reality, or is it just the economics?
The
That's
thing
all I
with,
get.
so I'll speak just about hemp CBD real quickly. Hemp is a bioaccumulator. So a lot of these companies, these organizations, they're using hemp-derived CBD, and hemp is a bioaccumulator. That means it has the ability, when you plant it in the ground, to absorb like a sponge everything that's in the ground. All of the pesticides, all of the herbicides, everything, like anything that you can find, it has such a strong capacity to absorb all of that into the plant. So super important to know that where you're getting your CBD, there's so much information, I'm really glad you asked that. Absolutely organic. Also, hemp plants, they said that if they plant hemp in Fukushima, clear all of that up, right? But it just has this really beautiful ability, to change. And they're also using it in agriculture. So clearing up, the stagnation that's happening, in our soil, so that they can start replanting other types of agriculture. So hemp is being used in many different areas on many different levels, but yes, helping clean up the planet as well. So a lot of different levels.
Some comments on coffee. Apparently, the ochratoxin in coffee is quite toxic. And Dave Asprey talked to a Japanese person who said, "Oh, we export all our moldy coffee to the U.S. because they don't care."
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another one. So I do bulletproof too.
Any comments about any other side effects that any of the studies that you looked at found? And I just might add, I had a relative who, can you hear? Okay. I had a relative who took CBD because of back pain and some other pain, and eventually got really lax bowels and extremely constipated, and then got necrotic bowel. And there was some question as to whether the CBD might have affected that.
So great question. I will preface my answer by saying I think it's really important. Anyone who's using CBD or cannabis, to work with their health professional, whoever your doctor is. I think it's really important to involve your doctor in this, because everyone's going to experience it differently, right? I'm saying that we don't have the receptors in our brain, so you can't stop your respiration. You're not going to die, from an overdose. But all of the other different pathways, we need so much more research. That's part of it. Like, we don't have enough research, to tell us what's actually happening in individuals, like humans. The one thing that I do know, as far as side effects, the one thing that I do know that it influenced the P450 pathways. And this is why it's important to, and that can be, it's not like one drug, right? That can be any amount of drugs, right, that influences it. So, for instance, with my mom, it was influencing the way that her body was breaking down some of her opioids. But in some people, what happens is it breaks it down faster, and for some people, it breaks it down slower. So you might get an accumulation of it, or you might release it quicker from the body. So again, everyone's completely different, and this could be true with your anxiety or depression medications. Like, it's all completely different because it's changing, there's an influence anyways on the P450 pathways. So I think it's important to work with your medical doctor. I think it's important to take notes on what you're experiencing, especially if you're on medication, right? So involve your physician. As far as the diarrhea, like changing the way the bowel, it does influence motility of the GI system, constipation. Or maybe this person wasn't getting it enough, I don't know, because it really helps eliminate. I know a lot of people that's helped specifically with constipation. But yeah, it's hard to know. And was it organic? Was it organic? So.
Hold on.
Yes.
Just one more question, but we got to make it short.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is, I would kind of give the caveat of a doctor that kind of knows something about it rather than the doctor that her grandmother went to that
My
probably
aunts,
didn't know anything but said no.
Absolutely,
So.
yeah. And be a health advocate for yourself, too.
Dr. Shade is a really good doctor for that. And I was going to talk about the toxins and how, I was doing a lot of CBD products and THC products, and I didn't really like the way they taste. I felt really bad after. I just felt like weird. And then I tried to make my own CBD, and I was going to SC Santa Cruz Labs, and it's very, very hard to make a product that doesn't have toxins in it. I found Quicksilver, and then I really liked the products, and then I found they did a Prime My Body, and all the Prime My Body is the thing I like about it. It has a certificate with every batch.
Yeah.
And Dr. Shea was a biodynamic farmer before, so you're talking about source, and for me, the way something is sourced is very, very important, just like you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I absolutely concur on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dr. Shade's a really good person to be looking up on YouTube about that.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I follow a lot of his stuff too. And last thing, so one of the side effects, again, because we're upregulating our antioxidant pathways, we do start detoxing, right? So sometimes there's the detoxing, side effects that people experience when it's working really well.
Okay, let's
You guys
give
are
a
amazing.
good hand.
Thank you.
And
Thank
there'll
you.
be a 10-minute break. We'll be here at 9:05 promptly, so we can start our second speaker. Thank you.